Pardesi Beats. What's happening, everybody? You're watching Pardesi Beats Unplugged, or perhaps listening to us on any of the major platforms for podcasts. And today we're going to bring you kind of, I don't know if we should call this, a part two of something we've done, but it is a bridge from something we've discussed in the past. And it's a little bit of behind the scenes. So behind the scenes in the Punjabi music industry, very specific to Edmonton and our situation here. So in our Punjabi music industry episode, we did, before we actually went on and did the episode, we were talking a lot about, hey, Pat, everybody was telling me, lay it out there, tell everybody what really happens, tell everybody the truth, what really goes down in the studio. And that episode took a little bit more of a narrative on the actual industry, meaning the stuff that's getting released. So we're going to do that sort of behind the scenes today. With me today, as always, we have Tadwal. I don't know which side you're on based on you, but Jalo, he's there up here somewhere. And we have Kushwant Singh as well. Both of which will very much relate to a lot of what we're going to talk about today. One as a partial participant and very, very much bystander who's been the watcher in this. That would be Kushwant. And then one who is like a very, very involved participant in terms of worked with me in some of these situations. And even if not worked with me in a situation, been privy to many other situations going on, and that's Malik. So, Kushi, we're going to call you Watchwant, and in this episode, and you're a Marvel character, new Marvel character called Watchwant. So, do you have a watch on?
No.
Okay, you ruined it. So, all right. So we're going to start with.
Here's the time.
There you go. So we're going to start with a little bit of, I guess you can say, why we're talking about this. Okay, so. If you guys don't already know, there's other than Pardesi Beats, when we used to be on the radio, I have a recording studio, and we've done many projects, us in this chat right now, either collectively or different parts where everybody's been there. But I've done a lot of recordings for a lot of different artists, some of which you've heard through me or Malik here, some of which you've heard without knowing that it's been done in my studio. I can't say more than that. And some of which you'll probably never ever hear, which Malik can also attest to. But the point that I'm trying to make is we want to talk a little bit about behind the scenes, what happens in the making of a Punjabi song from a producer and even a singer's perspective, with Malik in here, and somebody who comes in and helps with Kushwant. And we kind of want to set that tone of, it's not really what you think it is. And it's not as glamorous as people assume it would be to come into a studio. So having said that, Malik, Kushwant, do you want to add anything to the little monologue pro talk here or whatever, pre-talk? Sorry.
Yeah, I don't think there's too much to say more than it's obviously you've been doing this for a long time yourself, but the one thing, and you've had interesting scenarios happen, different stories, so lots of different experiences, and people who aren't artists in that sense or creatives, I'm sure they'll kind of find some of the stories pretty funny or interesting, if we can even break down a couple stuff. But yeah, it's definitely, as you said, not what you would expect or as you see on Instagram, when rappers are going live or something, right? So
yeah, even Punjabi artists, with
Money Sandhu, he sometimes shows his stuff, for example, right? So yeah, it's interesting, right? Different people have different setups as well, and different artists do work in different ways for sure. So yeah, it's I think it'll be a cool little take on that.
Yeah, so right now I'm not in the recording studio. There is an episode where it's our little mini episode. I believe it was the NHL playoff predictions, where you can actually see me sitting side by side with Kushwant in the studio.
Well, we did a whole show in the studio.
Which one did we do? There's one with the blue. There's a sofa behind us. You guys can. Yeah. You guys should already know this before more than us. because you guys are watching and subscribed and everything. So Malik, what about you? Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think like you said, our stories are going to be very specific to Punjabi music and more so our experience in the Edmonton scene and the Canada scene.
Yeah.
But with, I think a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about, like Kushwant kind of alluded to, you see the glamorous side of things on social media. You see the rappers going on Instagram, posting their lifestyle, all that stuff. But there's so much more to it that took it to get to that point, but also even everything behind the scenes.
Yeah, and even
led
that
up
is
to that
very
point.
staged because
Yeah,
we'll reveal it.
yeah. And I think the other part of it is with art in general. If we're thinking music, if we're doing any other creative avenue, if it's drawing, if it's anything else, the processes are very similar. It's not as glamorous as we always think it is. So I think shedding light on what it is behind the scenes is pretty neat.
Well, let's start with a little bit of just the creativity topic, which we will be diving into in quite a bit of depth, in the future. And what sparks creativity in us is a whole topic that we're going to tackle soon. But right now, like just to give you a little, I guess a hint of that in terms of my working in the studio. So for me to get creative and be in the studio, I really have to be into what's being made. If I'm not into it, whether it's for myself or for somebody else, or I'm just, recording vocals or dubbing vocals, as they call it, for somebody else, then I'm literally like, I really don't care sometimes. And you'll find, like, when you go into any recording studio that's mainstream, there's always an engineer, there's always somebody sitting there tracking. There's usually two, and then there's a producer. There's usually three people, sometimes two, and then very rarely one. And I'm talking about in mainstream Western music from the English language, right? Whether that's hip hop, rock, pop. So there's a team usually in there. Now with the Punjabi music industry, there's only usually one or two artists that are sort of behind the scenes. Our industry is such that you often have to go through a struggle. And I think I'm going to start there of how I became a producer. I'm going to say it's a really long story, but I'm going to say it in a very, summarized way. But it's usually only me in the studio. It's not like I can tell like somebody to go do this. And I mean, don't get me wrong. I've asked you guys for help in different aspects in the past, and we'll go into that. But it's not like I can be like, hey, go do this, go do that, go do this, right? So how it usually goes is, in terms of my story, is I started off with a love of music, wanted to be a producer, ended up becoming a DJ, thinking that's what would get me into production. Did an audio engineering course so I can actually study how to actually run a studio. That also actually manifested into my DJ life too. Remember, Malik, when the first time you had to wrap cables? And I was like, that's not how you wrap an audio cable. And Kushwant also never wanted to come after that too. So there's those instances.
But I don't know about Malik, if he ever graduated.
Malik had about 4 years to get it right, and I think we're gonna get you, since COVID.
Yeah, we'll do a live demonstration on the podcast one day.
I'm gonna get you to do one and just see if you can
yeah.
remember. Malik, wrap this XLR cable and see what happens. Not that way.
For those who can't see, if you're listening, he was just reenacting it via the video. But anyways,
when people take it and go around their wrist and elbow and all that, that's what I just did. But so we went into that world, and then production started, and it wasn't what I thought it was. And it all starts from a sort of, oh, this is what I want, and where does that spark come? It's usually from seeing other artists. And I feel like being in the game, whether I'm in there a lot or very, limitedly, I see a lot of artists coming in with that same dream that I started with. And it was to do that thing and be on that stage. And I somehow persevered and survived the reality checks that are through the process. And I still love it because the creative side of it, which we'll talk about in our creativity episode, that keeps me in. But other than that, it's a very messed up industry in good ways and bad ways. It's very not as simple as you think it would be. And the thing is, what entices most people to come into it is the promise of fame or being popular or known. And that's not what enticed me, but it also is not something that wasn't a part of what enticed me. So I wanted to do that stuff. I wanted to do sort of what A lot of artists, like when I was growing up, B21, RDB, Sukshinder Shinda, these type of guys were doing Bali Sagu, right? So these type of people, when I was growing up, I was listening to, I was like, I want to make that, I want to do that. And I'd watch a lot of events on the internet, RDB TV, shout out to Koli, who has passed away, legend in the game, changed the whole thing before YouTube. And
Passport, passport, $10. Passport. No, you don't remember that?
I remember that.
It was with Manj and Mitch.
Yeah. Manj, and shout out to Manj, by the way. So it was that time when I was like, yeah, I want to do this. And I actually even went in with a few of our friends here in Edmonton and, to do shows, to do live events that were kind of happening in the UK scene. So I kind of wanted to bring that into Edmonton because I was like, why can't we have that here? That was the premise. And it took a long time, and it's finally kind of getting there now. So along the way, I encountered a lot of different people, some of which are artists, some of which wanted to be artists, and some of which had no idea what they wanted or what they were doing, but sure, our paths crossed maybe once or a few times. And so this is a little bit of behind the scenes into a song. Okay. So this is what happens. And this is where you guys need to jump in because I'll go into a rant. You guys got to keep me on track here. I'll tell you right now. So here's what happens today. So that's sort of how I started and went into it. But what usually happens today in the life of me in the studio is I go into the studio. I know I have 3 hours, and usually when I'm in that second or third hour, that's when my creativity kind of starts gearing up. And so by the time my time limit ends, my creativity gets shot. And that's sort of the premise of everything. But usually what happens, Malik, you were sort of saying this earlier, is I'll get a phone call, I'll get a text, and it'll be like, "Paji, gana karna si appa." And I'll be like, okay. And that's literally what I say. I literally every single time, I know that I'm not going to say anything other than okay. And I literally do that on purpose because that leads them to either be showing me that they're organized and they know what they want, or that leads them to kind of not say anything. And then I can get a sort of idea of, okay, do they actually know what they want to do? Or is it just kind of like an idea for them? Because a lot of these phone calls are just like dreams. I know your number, so I'm going to call you and tell you I want to do this. And I'll start with okay. And it'll lead to like either something or nothing at all. And I've had a lot of different artists come in the studio who have not been ready to be in the studio. And I think our social media these days portrays that it's easy to do, it's accessible, and you can just go in and do it, when that's not the case. I've had guys who have, and I'm not going to name anybody. I might name Malik, but I'm not going to name anybody else. I've had guys come in the studio and they're like, yeah, I got 3 songs. And I'm like, okay. And first they sing it. They're not on key. They're not in any particular rag or melody. They're all over the place. Okay, fine. Then there's a second one who kind of has like a natural, nice voice that could work. And they sing it, but they don't know how to sing. But okay, sure, you can make a lot of edits to make that work, but they can't stay in the rhythm for the life of them. Like, I don't know how they drive in their lane. I don't know how they walk without tripping over their own feet. That's how off of rhythm they are when they're singing. They can't stay on the beat. So then there's those. And then there's those type of artists who come in and they get a hold of you from somebody else in the community. Somebody calls you and say, hey, I have this guy, do something for him. And they come and bring him in, and it's usually been a him, not a her. That's what I'm saying, bring him in. I'm not trying to be biased or anything. So they usually bring him in. And, there was this one singer, he came in, another guy who's was in the media, isn't anymore, brought him in and introduced us. And he's like, he's new, he doesn't have much, he wants to do all this stuff. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, okay. So, I'm kind of like, oh man, this is a waste of time, right? And not to sound like like an ass, but a lot of the time you have to adopt that mentality of being an ass to filter out a lot of garbage and, keep yourself sane through whatever it is you're doing. And the guy that sang or wanted to do that song ended up being a really amazing singer. And he didn't learn anything. He didn't learn from anybody. He didn't go to any school. And because I asked these questions, sort of, oh, where have you learned your music from? You know, do you have any sort of teacher? Did you do any, you know, anything? Like, did you go to school or did you do anything for music?
Do you know what Bella Kara is? Do you know what a rag
In
is?
Punjabi music, especially, like, do you know these things which would help me sort of communicate to you while you're singing that go on this, do this, do this, because then I can't navigate the person. And this guy didn't know much.
It's like music theory versus just raw talent, right?
Yeah. And so this guy was solid raw talent, the way he presented himself, and he was really good. And so I'll just say this: I have a song released with this person, and I'll leave it at that. But you guys can go and hear that. Anyways, so the point, to kind of digress from that little rant and ramble, is that I see a lot coming into the studio, and it's not often warranted. And I think the main idea I'm getting to here is, why do people think they can just walk in a studio without any knowledge, without any preparation, and just belt out a song and then be one of the top grossing artists on YouTube and get all the fame and popularity and, you know, all these sort of things. So Malik, maybe this is a good place for you to sort of navigate the ship into like a more steady path, because I can go everywhere with this, right?
And so where I picked up is kind of that the creativity aspect of coming into a studio and recording. That process of, I have this song, and I'm gonna go back to our experience together when we were recording Tare Nar. I came in, I'm like, okay, so if I want to make an impact on the industry, I have to release a upbeat song.
Mm-hmm.
I know as a singer, I'm more suited for romantic songs, slower songs.
But did you know that then? That's the real question.
But I didn't want to do that.
Okay.
So I remember this very vividly. We're sitting there, you gave me the beat. I'm like, yeah, this, and then you're just looking at me like, this isn't it. Like you said, your creative juices weren't flowing, and you're like, this is like very bland. It's a very typical, like, and at that point you knew like my vibe as well. You're like, I understand, like, you want to give that perspective of like a respectful song. You want to do like a family friendly song and that vibe. So you're like, okay, is there anything else that you want to do? And so like I went through all my notes, all my books. I'm like, well, there's a song I wrote or started to write 4 years ago. And then that is, so from, it was like a Gidda style, like Bhangra song. That was the reason I came in. I'm like, no, I'm going to record this. This is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And then it turned into a romantic, sad / love song, whatever you want to call it, Tare Nar. But it goes.
We went over many different names for it, but yeah.
Tare Nar. But the point of that is, it's that creative process. It's not only, like you said, it's meshing with that person that you're working with. It's being on that same wavelength as well. I don't think in our creative process at all there was any moments where we butt heads. Whereas if you look at the industry, there's often times where you'll see a producer wants to do something, an artist wants to do something, and that's where you get the politics. That's where you get the beef. If it's real or if it's just for views, whatever it is, that's where you get those weird storylines in the songs and stuff. But I think the important part is like that creative process. If you're going into a studio, and it's not just music, it's anything. If you're like, we'll harken back to our previous conversation where Simran was working in his woodworking shop. He's going into the woodworking shop because that's his craft. He knows what he's going in there to build and do. He has a plan of action. I'm not going to go in there and build a table. I'm not going to go and play Dungeons and Dragons because that's not my vibe. Or
wrap audio cables.
Yeah, or wrap audio cables. My lane is music and singing, and I know what my strengths are, and writing as well, I guess. But those are my strengths. And if I'm coming into a place to show off my art, and I'm going on a rant similar to what I did the previous week when we were talking about Punjabi music.
That's okay. That's how this goes.
If I'm practicing my art, I want to show off what I'm skilled at, not like, I'm never going to sing a song about alcohol. I'm never going to sing a song about the gangster life because that's not me. Don't relate to it.
Every day down the street. Just cruising around in your 64 Impala.
that I don't know how to drive. But it's if you're gonna do any art, I know we're focusing on music today more so behind the studio and the
but it
producer
goes into
aspect
any
of it.
art, yeah.
In any art, if it's drawing, if it's video games, if it's woodworking, whatever it is, knowing your strengths is really important.
That's true. You know, like before got into the music scene, being brothers with Kushwant here, me and him used to go out there in our 64 Impala, and we used to wear our plaid shirts and, you know, kill demons and find ghosts and all these other creatures. And then they made a show about us called Supernatural. But the reality is, you were talking about Tarenal, and Kushi, I'm going to get you involved in this too, because I know you're kind of like, what do I do here?
Yeah, Kushi got sick of seeing my face after a while. That's
okay. So we're gonna let's talk about Tarenal specifically, and we can lay it out, because I don't think me and you have ever talked about Tarenal to each other regarding each other working with each other. I don't think we've ever talked about it. So this is kind of funny that we're doing it. But the thing is, like, we made Tarenal together. You came to me, you're like, I want to make this song. And I was like, all right, this is all like how it's going to go. And this is before we knew what the song was. So, you know, you came into the studio and you're flipping through your book. You're like, this. And I was like, next. And then you were kind of like, I don't know, right? Because these were all sort of ideas you came out with based on an end idea that you had in your mind, that you envisioned. And then, so this is where I feel like, and I'm not saying like I knew this was going to happen. Like, I'm not saying I'm some magical, supernatural music producer who I'll just right away be able to tell you what you can do and which song is going to work for you. But you pulled out this thing, like you said, 4 years ago, I wrote this,
part of it. Yeah. And we molded it to what it became. It wasn't
like you wrote like the main idea behind it, and then we kind of took it from there. But that's when us collectively had our artistic spark in the studio, and I was like, you could do this, and then you're like, but then I can do this, and boom, I can do this, and then when the video, I'll stand on my cousin's balcony, and it turned into all these things that literally just, as you said, we meshed and it just went. And I think that's the thing in working with somebody in art, is you have to vibe with the person you're working with. That's why shout out to Sidhu Musiala, who I feel like his voice vibed the best with the Brown Boys, with Big Bird and Sonny Malton. They're not together anymore, so that vibe is gone. That thing that people initially loved about them is gone. Same thing with B21 when Justy Sidhu was a part of it. Justy Sidhu after that didn't sound the same. B20, you know what I mean? Like all these bands and groups that sort of changed and all that. It's usually when you work with somebody that you get that sound, right? Shinda Jazzy is sort of my biggest example from the Punjabi music industry. So, and Charanjit Ahuja and his squad with Hansraj Sardul and those type of artists. So you came in and you laid it out, and then I had to give you a little bit of guidance, and then you had to tell me what you want, and we sort of went back and forth playing catch until the song emerged in its infant stages. And then Kushwant came downstairs and he was like, what are you guys doing? And then he's sitting there and he's like, and that's a big part of it. It's the people that are around you that aren't the artists, that like Kushi or shout out to Gurjot Sandhu, who would often be there during that time, who was also part of the project in a different creative way. And other people like that, they would come. Even Simran came in during that time, and he would listen and be like, yo, like, try this and try, and and so that sort of helps. But if you don't have an initial idea and understanding of what you're going to do, it ain't going to happen. So we'll get back to Tarenal, but I'm going to give you an example of how most of the time my phone calls start and where they end up. So first of all, when you're a producer in Canada, you're like me, somebody born and raised here, and you're doing this, you have to invest in your craft, right? So if I have a recording studio, it's not a computer with a microphone attached and like headphones. I did audio engineering and I wanted to get a proper studio set up. So the problem that I have now becomes that art versus that income, or I guess you can say recuperation of cost, whichever way you want to look at it. So I'd often get phone calls from different artists, "Bhai, aapa gana karna," right? And they come in and they want to do something for free, or they want to sit down with you for free. They want to do all these things and just, you know, spend 2-3 hours for free. Now, I'm willing to do that because I want Edmonton to get on the map in the Punjabi music industry. But at the same time, I find a lot of it is a waste of time and nothing really amounts out of it. And I think that's because I don't find creativity in it. And because I'm just a person in the middle for the other person to get to where they want, to allow them to record vocals, and that's it. And take selfies in my studio and post those online to get their, you know, 2 minutes of whatever
But
clout.
I think you're touching on an important point. But now with, I know we'll kind of not go into this conversation because we did this last week, was that Canadian music is now emerging. We saw artists like Jay Static do a lot of work behind the scenes for Deep Jundu, who was also based out of Toronto. But now Jay Static is no longer kind of that middleman to get to that Deep Jundu or the bigger. Now it's like you go to Jay Static because he's a reputable name.
Yeah.
But I think that's the cool thing, seeing how the Canadian, and also RDB, right? That they were a big Canadian artist. But it's cool to see the emergence of Canadian Punjabi music. But like you said, there's still a lot of Canadian producers that are stuck as that stepping stone to go to India, go to UK, go to even like.
I think the biggest problem with that is in Canada, we're so spread apart geographically. Like our country is so big and vast. Now, if I want to work with anybody in Edmonton, first of all, how do I know who the artists are in Edmonton? Unless I've met them or grown up with them, right? There's actually a lot of music artists in Edmonton. But the problem if you're an artist that's from Punjab or somewhere else and you have to come here, so let's say you're an artist from Punjab, okay? You're born in Punjab, you got that talent, you've even learned, and you come here. You're stuck in a cycle of either working for PR, working or being a student and having these dreams and focusing on that, or here with your family and you have to hustle to make ends meet. How are you going to focus on your art? You have to provide for your family or yourself, or potentially for the family back home in Punjab, right? So you get stuck in that sort of work vibe, I guess. I wanted to say the capitalist, but I mean it's not a bad thing in that regard. But you kind of get stuck in that I got to make some money cycle, and even I did. Like I paid for all these things in the studio, now I got to pay them off. So I'm too busy to be in the studio. So how does that, you know what I mean? But the thing is, I feel like artists that are in England, and then Punjab, they're geographically so close to each other that they can call somebody up and be like, hey, I need to record this, come down. They're there within maximum 3 hours, right? Depending. And we're in Canada. I know a lot of musicians, but they're in Vancouver and Toronto. They're in the big hubs because a lot of those musicians also end up going on the road with tours for other artists when they come from India. So I think our Canadian music industry is a little bit different. Where it's doing very, very well is in the hip hop West Coast soundscape, right? So the Big Bird, currently, like I referenced him with Sidhu
even
Moosewala.
Intense, like if you think about it, Intense.
I'm going into
now,
Intense next,
right?
yeah. So and then there's Big Bird, and then that style. I'm not going to Deep Jundu and those guys because they do Desi stuff. I'm talking about just Western, and I'm getting to why. And then Intense, who has done Desi stuff, but it's mainly Western hip hoppy as well.
But that
so Intense
took a lot of time. Like you're kind of explaining like the whole breakdown for the Canadian. There's a lot of artists. Like that's the thing. Also, is that there's no avenues really for in Canada for Punjabi music to grow and be a star, right? There really wasn't. Like think about how many artists there are and how many are successful. It's like, what is it, like 0.00 something percent? Like it's crazy because like the thing, like there's no infrastructure in terms of marketing, you know, the big what's it called, like the studio or whatever, right? The album, those guys, right? So like in India, yeah, you have all those guys, Tips, whatever.
Oh, you mean record labels? Yeah,
record labels. There you go.
So
and like they're here, but they're not really. It's like here, a niche. It's like a niche market in a sense because like it's so.
Yeah.
Especially with like, let's be real. Like we're not gonna pay money for stuff as being Desis, right? There's a lot of illegal downloads and stuff as well. But even like when you go to concerts and stuff, it's like a lot of the time it's like people aren't there to appreciate the music. Like if you're doing like, so let's say if you're like what if we're referencing hip hop artists, for example, right? You're not going to go there to appreciate music. You're probably going to go there to get drunk and to party and stuff, right? So there's a lot of different reasons why you're going as well. So I feel like it's always been a tough market for Punjabi artists trying to
it's
thrive in
definitely a
Canada.
tough market. I think it's a little bit of, well, here especially, it's kind of like you got to put the cost of getting, let's say if you're making a studio, right? You got to buy all that stuff.
Yeah, you have
somehow
to invest in stuff, and it's like you got to know that you're probably not going to make that money back. It'll take a long time before you do, if you can.
And every art, including myself, I always started off thinking, okay, I'll buy all this stuff. Eventually, it'll make its money back. I hardly doubt that happened, not through that industry, at least, right? So I think more so like when you talk about sort of what happens behind the scenes in the studio, I'm going to give you a successful example, but I'm also going to sort of, we referenced the Musiala breaking up with the big Brown Boys band. I'm going to talk about that side of things and how things start happening and how individuals get in the music industry. Okay. Yes, there's a struggle to grow for sure, but there's also a point where people think they've made it before they've even closely made it. So I'm going to talk about this. All right, so Malik, you've worked with me in the studio. You know what the vibe is like. You've come in. We did the Thad NL song. We've done 2-3 other songs too that nobody knows about, but now they do. But they won't hear them right now, unless you want me to play something to do with something.
No,
okay, I won't.
All
right, something to do with the ground, and okay, I won't do it. But
I was like, we could share that story. That goes right back to the point where an artist comes in,
share
and
it.
He thinks. Okay, so this was, I would probably say I was still in high school at this point. So I was a young boy.
Or just out. Yeah.
And me and I'd say our relationship really didn't exist. I was more so associated with Kush than I was with you.
Yeah.
At that point. But I'm like, I want to record something because like I was always singing in high school. That's what I was known for, Bhangra and singing. So I'm like, all right, cool. I'm gonna go in there. Let's see, figure out a song. I'm gonna sing. I like Dilshad Akhtar. Let's do this song. And I came in there. I came with Gurjot. I do remember this very vividly.
I'm so tempted to play it. I won't though. Continue.
No. Come in. I feel like I'm the shit. Like I got this. Like everybody. Like you have that mentality of hyping yourself up, and then the disaster of a train wreck of a vocal recording happened, and that experience is pretty bad. but then that's that humbling experience. Even though I know rags, I know melody, I know the theory, it's like the application was absolute garbage. That was outside of my lane, and I think that was the point where you were coming to. It's like knowing like how to sing is important, but also like the process is totally different. Like we talked about live singing, totally different than studio singing, totally different than miming a song, right? There's different aspects to that creativity too.
Yeah, and there's artists. There's also a discrepancy between artists that are sort of from Canada and our way of doing things compared to like artists that come from Punjab or even England. I think we're more aligned with England, but England is a middle ground between Punjab and here for sure, and how they operate. So I'll give you another story. I was working with this artist who was initially from Punjab, living here. Amazing vocalist, like so good, and a learned vocalist. Vibed with me in terms of the music choices we liked, and we operated well together as a musical group, right? Let's just say it that way. Like the way he would do things, I would also do them, and we would often complement each other in different ways. So we finish up our project, and the project's nearing completion. The project's done, but the video is nearing completion. And then there's a discrepancy, and the discrepancy is literally based on ideologies that are different in Canada or North America, I should say, and then those that are from Punjab or even kind of maybe in England, right? And those discrepancies were enough to make that person upset and no longer want to, work on certain projects, and sort of, you can say then that dream team if you want to call it that, broke up. Right. And that's one of those experiences. And I've had this with other artists too, because we're not really a group. We're just working together and we have a vibe. Right. And so at the end of the day, what happened was there was 3-4 projects in the loop and they're really good. And it maybe wasn't like something that everybody would listen to, like Karanajala, Sidhu Musela right now, but there was something that would last forever, that you could listen to anytime. Kind of the stuff that Malik, you wanted to make when you first came in with Tarianal. It was that same ideology. Like, I want to make something like this, something wholesome, something that's timeless, something that you can listen to with your kids, something you can listen to with your parents, your sisters, whoever, right? And that's the kind of stuff I was making. But so I think what the problem is that people come in for the wrong reasons, even if they act as humble as they can be. Whereas there's also people, I think I'm more like this, is because obviously you're not going to come in and I'm not going to make a song for somebody for free. Like, I'm not doing it for free for somebody else, right? Like, obviously there's a cost to it. But people often want it for free or they want it for cheap. And the thing is, we in Canada, in the Canadian music industry, we have something that, is very precious, which is called time. And here, time is often known as money. And if you're spending time with somebody else, there's usually a cost to that time. Unless you're on the same mission and you have the same purpose, then obviously then all that's left is really costs. Right. And then you got to cover those. So, this person that I was working with, we were kind of on the same mission. And costs got, mainly fronted by me, and that person didn't want to pay anything. And these sort of discrepancies come because it's that mentality of, oh, you're the producer, you're supposed to front everything. Or, but then I would ask, well, why do you want, you want all the fame then? Why doesn't the producer get some of it? And these type of conversations come out of the Punjabi music industry. And I think there's no, as you said, framework for it. There's no right way for it, especially being displaced from Punjab to everywhere else in the world now. USA, Canada, UK, even Australia. There's a Punjabi music industry in all these sort of countries where Punjabis have, now put their roots in. And it's not the same as Punjab, but people come here with the mentality of Punjab. And even Punjab's evolved from that time. So that's sort of the problem with what I think is happening. And I think people are coming in for the wrong reasons. Even if they're nice people, humble people, I think their intentions are very selfish. And I think the whole Punjabi music industry, you can go back to that episode and watch it, is about like clout. Right? That's the new age word that I'm adopting nowadays. It's all about like looking popular. Kushi, you've sort of seen these things. You've seen different artists come in. You've seen Malik and me work together in many different ways. Not just doing our song. We've done a lot of other things. We've DJ'd together. We've done a lot of things like that. So, Kushi, you got involved in the studio a little bit because I kind of forced you to. And Malik was involved in that project too. And as simple as just doing backing vocals where you guys were going, hoy, 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 in the back of one of my songs. And so you got to experience a little bit of being in a vocal booth, getting direction of what to do. First of all, how did you feel? Like, did you think it was sort of what you maybe imagined when you went and did all that?
Well, I've been involved in a lot of your music stuff as a passenger, you could say, or just a supporting member throughout my life, like a long time, mostly DJing, but I've sat in a lot of your studio sessions, even before you would have any artist join you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've seen your process for quite some time. I've seen like how you work things, and and it's cool because it's really it's kind of grindy, but like in an artistic way.
Yeah.
And then like from my experience, like when I hopped in, it's like because it's if you know me, I can do voices, like whatever. I can do impersonations and stuff. So for me, it was just cool. It was fun, right? Like why not? And then then of course, like I've learned some music theory from you, some really basic stuff. So when you're trying to guide me, it's like it wasn't too hard for me to be like, oh, okay, I see what you're trying to say. And it's like I never really, I guess, the only thing I ever really pictured myself doing is like maybe just doing a rap, right? But I've never like thought like so hard about the experience. It's like, okay, cool, you just go and do it. But that's not the case, right? So that definitely wasn't the reality. It's like even just for just background vocals, like in some songs, and you asked for like more than one kind of like take of the shots, different pitches, like different timings, all that stuff, right? Trying to keep us like in line and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, like and I've done it with like more than one person in the booth. Right? I think there was 3 of us, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, no, you're too overpowering than this person, so tone your voice down, and this person would try to raise their voice. So it's definitely a more of a process, right? Especially when you're working with like the audio and levels and those types of things, and staying on beat, right? So it was cool. Like I enjoyed it a lot, but it's fun, right? To me, like those things they're just super fun to kind of do, right? And then like creatively, it's it's kind of fulfilling in a sense, because as not as a creator of music, but as a person who very much enjoys music, and kind of being around people that are so into music like yourself or Malik, it's been really it's like cool to get involved and kind of get a little taste of that as well.
Yeah. So when you saw Malik's song being made, Tarenal, right?
Yeah.
When we were in there,
Yeah.
what did you sort of see? Like, I want to get your perspective, because when me and Malik talk about this, something that we made, we get like, we're like going back and talking about our memories, right? But
also I'm also just generally a positive person, so like no matter what happened with the song, I'm like, it was cool, it was fun.
Yeah. But there was moments like Malik where you weren't feeling something I did, or I wasn't feeling something you did.
27 takes can attest to that,
well,
sure.
like I feel like those things are going to happen, like when you are working, like I said, like it's a grind, right? And you guys are grinding that out to try. The thing with definitely with you Patwant and Malik, you too, and I've told you this before, like you have a lot of Patwant, you have so much music that's created that never has heard the light of day, right? And to you, it's because you're perfectionist with that stuff. And Malik, I could say you're probably the same with your vocals as well, right? So that's why it's different for you guys, and it's different for other people. But like from my experience, just like watching you guys, it's a grind, because you're trying to perfect everything, every little aspect, and because to you, it's really important. To both of you, it's really important. Like what you're putting out there is like the highest quality. Quality has tremendous meaning to you both, right? So like there's frustrations and like hiccups along the way, like for that whole process of you guys recording that song, lots of time went into it, but as artists, it's because you wanted to be fulfilled in what you were releasing. So like as a bystander, like I can get that as somebody who understands like a creative process, or how kind of art is and it works, like I can get that, right?
Yeah. And I think, as artists, doesn't matter what element your art is, or, what part of your journey you are in doing your art the way you want it to be. There's sort of iconic artists that you live up to, that sort of inspired you to get to certain parts of your art. And I'll just say it like straight, I've never hidden this. In terms of audio quality, now, that wasn't this artist's doing, but in this artist's music, I heard probably what is close to perfection, in my opinion. And I'm talking about Sukhshinder Shinda from the UK. And he worked with a lot of different, like Tom Lowry is his engineer in Planet Studios, and all this sort of stuff. So I know there's way more to it now than I did when I started. But Shinda, you listen to his music, the way his stole sounds like thunder coming from the heavens, where Zeus is angry, the Greek god Zeus, not Dr. Zeus. The Greek god Zeus is angry, and the thunder is rumbling, and he's coming. And you hear that thunder and lightning with the Shinda stole. And you're just like, wow, that sounded insane. So for me, that's my perfection, is everything needs to sound, perfect. And you're right. The perfectionist mindset is something that I do this for. Like, why would I do a subpar anything? And that's right. There's a lot of my projects that are sitting there, which
you can just release a whole album with projects that
it's interesting because you have to like from my perspective, I would balance it. I would view it in a
Yeah.
different way, right? But like
I know.
I'm not the artist, right? And like
Yeah.
I've told you this before. I'm like, yo, I think your music is so good. Just put it out there, right? Like there's a lot of
Yeah.
this is even like your original work. I was like, wow, this is like really good. It's really catchy. Like people are
And I
gonna
didn't
love
like
it.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it never, it's
But I
still
think, and
in
yeah,
the
from an
computer.
artist perspective, is like that's where you learn. You're like, okay, what is the balance between that perfectionism
Yeah.
and putting out something that will still fulfill me as an artist, but
Yeah.
also keeps
And
me there.
And Malik, I don't know about you, but for me, I've gotten there now where I'm just like, you know
Yeah,
what, it's
same.
good enough. Out it goes. But there was a certain point where
I
that
don't I don't
happened.
I don't believe you until that album drops. I don't believe you.
Well, that album,
I think the same
they're
too.
never nobody. No, everybody's like, yo, Pat's dropping an album, but the thing is, I've never
The
said it
lost
myself.
files. The
Yeah,
lost files.
Oh, they're there.
something
They're
like
not
that.
lost. They're just the
They're right
unreleased
there. I'm
files.
looking at them. Yeah, I know.
The unreleased files. Supposed to
I'm
say
looking
that.
at the folder that they're in right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a point where when I was referencing that one artist that somebody introduced me to and it, like really blew my mind. It was at that point where I decided, you know what, like forget it, man. Let's just put it out there. It's good. We're vibing to this right now. There's a vibe there. Release it. Right. Obviously, you're going to get better as you go, like all these artists that we listen to have. And then, ironically, with that one artist that the other artist that I referenced who came in and we ended up having a difference of opinions. I was talking to that artist one day about a song that I sort of, I guess you can say, was the middleman for with that artist and another one. And then, the Punjabi music industry is such a weird industry that people always have beef, right? So what happened is, due to somebody else's beef, I had to stop working with one artist, and because I had to pick a side, like literally that's what it was. And a fourth artist would no longer be able to get their work to the artist I stopped working with. Okay, because of that, I was their actual middleman for that. And I told the artist that I stopped working with later. This sounds so messy, right? I can't name them, but I told him, I was like, you know what, I'm not working with this guy anymore, or I can't do anything for you that will be for this guy anymore due to blah blah blah. And then we had a discussion about the project we did make, and I was like, you know what, it was so good. We're in the studio, the vibes. I have nothing against that guy as an artist, I just can't work with him. And I was talking about or we both were talking about the vibe in the moment. So when you listen to a song, whether it's you as a group of artists aren't working together anymore, when you go back to that time that song was made, you can't replace that vibe no matter what. No matter what happened with that person, that vibe existed when it existed. And you can't knock it. And that vibe actually goes into the project you're making. So if I stopped working with, if I'm Justy Sidhu and I don't work with, the Jagpal brothers anymore, to once upon a time for B21. But if I go back and listen to Bali Jagpal, Bhutta Jagpal, and Justy Sidhu together, I'm gonna be like, holy, this is great.
The vibe is still there.
That vibe doesn't die because that's in the song now, right? So that's the thing. You may not get it again that same way, but that vibe doesn't go away.
Yeah, you touched on a really important point. As an artist, as a vocalist, I can speak to it a little bit more of learning and growing about the industry. We kind of saw, or like I guess mainstream saw it with Big Bird and Sidhu and Sunny Malt and all that stuff that happened. But
more recently, yeah.
I feel like this can be applicable to any type of art.
Yeah.
The amount of politics involved behind the scenes that normal people don't see, it's
so dumb.
It's ridiculous. And that's kind of one of the reasons that drew me away from continuing with music, pursuing it because everybody, or I'm very positive, and generally I'm like, I just don't want to deal with having to tell this person this or pick sides, this and that. And it's not only like we're talking from the studio perspective, but then that politic branches off into live performances, getting bookings, things like that. So that is another huge piece. And that also kind of talks to the story you're telling about that artist as well. That level of politics, it's just so.
This is where it goes. Like, okay, so let's say I'm an independent music producer, which I am, right? And Malik, you want to come record a new song. Okay. But I tell my brother, Kushi, that, hey, Malik's coming and Kushi has beef with you. And he's like, well, if you work with him, I'm not your brother anymore. I'm like, well, tell that to our parents. But
True story. True story.
true story, but with different people. And then, so, you know, then Cushy's like, well, I'm not going to work with you then. Fine, you can do whatever you want. Well, I'm not working with you if you work with that guy. And that kind of stuff happens way more than you think. There's so much internal beef. Being a music producer, you're kind of like, if you're not in a group, like, you know, like NWA with Dr. Dre was in part of that group, he was their music producer. If you're an independent music producer, that puts you in such a weird predicament that you really start to question even that artist that is telling you that, like really, like you're telling me how I can earn my bread and butter or how I can't earn my bread and butter because of your beef. And it's things like that. And, you know, the Punjabi industry is full of that. Like if I work with Malik, if I worked with Gurjot, right? If I worked with somebody else, we can reference Gurjot because he's our buddy. Then there might be some other XYZ singers or artists who might be like, "Oh, I'm never going to work with those guys. They're, you know, I'm never going to go to Pat for a song because he did a song for Kushwant or you know, for Malik."
And the thing with that is, it, like I said, it's not just the studio then, right? It leaks into like Kush said, it's a niche because you're not going to get those bookings because you're associated with so-and-so. Or your song is not going to become such a big hit because a lot of people are boycotting it because you're associated with so-and-so. And that's one thing I don't like about the industry, right? Like if we're trying to promote Punjabi language, Punjabi music, the fusion of what we've seen recently of like that hip hop vibe, which I really resonate with, into Punjabi music. Rather than butting heads, it should be more of a positive vibe, but we don't see that at all.
Well, the biggest thing I can say to any artist or potential artist, or even, you know, fulfilled artist, or I should say established artist, better wording, that maybe listening or watching is contracts. And also, I'll just say it flat. Just don't be a dick, straight up. Because you know what? Just don't be a dick. If somebody's working with somebody, let them. If you're working with somebody, work with them, right? And work on things as on a project to project basis and let it go from there. So I guess the premise of this episode, like without kind of, because we did kind of go all over the place in different spectrums, because it's so much, right? It's so much to unpack. It's just a little behind the scenes. And if
behind
you guys
the microphone,
behind the mic, behind the vocal booth, behind the, you know, behind the studio doors. So if you viewers or listeners resonate with anything, or you're wondering anything, or if you want us to deep dive into any specific topic to do with this, you know, let us know in the comments and stuff like that. And I wasn't really wrapping up here, but at the same time, Malik, is there anything you want to add? Like, I want to talk about Tara and before we end the show and how it was for me. And then Kushi, maybe if you want to add anything, you know, kind of watching all the projects that I've referenced. I know you've seen them sort of unfold here and there. But first of all, Kush, this question's for you because me and Malik can talk about it all the time. How long did it take to make that one song, Tarena?
I don't even think Kush knows.
No, it took you guys like over a year, I think.
Yeah, it was definitely over a year.
I mean, there's a lot of gaps in between. For sometimes you get burnt out too, and you want to take a break from the project, right? So I think that's what happened to you guys a bit. You know, a lot of recordings at the start, vocals, you know, then producing the beat and those things, and then you guys were fine tuning for quite a while too, and then it took a long time, right? But like.
Longer than a normal song generally takes nowadays.
Well,
you could do a song in a week almost, right? But then that's like you're hyper focused. All your time's going to. But like I mentioned before, right? It's the commitment to what the quality your guys' standards are, and if you're okay with it or not, because it's what you're putting out to the world. So you have to be comfortable with it, right? So like I can get that, I can understand that, right? Because a lot of artists take a long time to produce their own songs, right? Like some can produce it like within 1 year to year, they keep dropping albums, but you know, they're not a one-man band or like a really solo kind of crew either, right?
So here's sort of just a little idea. If somebody came to me and they said, hey, you know, hello, I want to do a song, Paji main gana karna. the thing is, they have the vision, right? I have to allow them to bring their vision in and see if I can create that vision for them for what they need me to. If I can't, I'll say peace out. If I can, I'll be like, all right, this is how, and this is how much it's going to cost, which is a lot of times people turn around and walk out the door. But that's the truth. Like I don't inflate the costs, right? So what I'm trying to say is, I think when you're working with somebody, you have to go in a very magical rainbowy way of saying it. You have to hold their hand the whole way, and you guys sort of have to work together. When you're working for somebody, that's a different thing. Then you have to take their vision and create it. And like I said, my biggest example was always Jazzy Shinda. I think they worked together more so than the other way around. Initially, when Jazzy B was discovered by Shinda, he was already discovered, and he already done an album with Sangtar, Manmohan Waris, and Kamal Heer's brother. But when he met Sukhshinder Shinda, I'm talking about Jazzy B, that vibe happened. That creativity happened where they both did, they both kind of vibed off of each other. And so not Ikwinder Singh, Sangtar's brother. Shout out to those two brothers from Toronto. They're doing it big as well. Ikwinder Singh especially. But also Sangtar, shout out to this Sangtar. If you go back to some of Just Rain's videos, you'll see him there in the background.
It's the grind of the art. That's what it is.
And you see where he was to where he is. And even Ikwinder Singh, if you look at some of Just Rain's old videos, he's there in his studio at that time. And that's just it. We were kind of touching on Intense in Vancouver, right? And Intense, I know him, I'm not buddies with him, but I've known him since he started, because me and him started around the same time. And we started the same way through DJing and things like that. And now he's making Diljit's album, right? And he's worked with Diljit in the past, but now he's producing his new album. And, it takes time, but if you're dedicated to your art, I think you'll persevere being focused on the art.
And kind of tying back to the politics and kind of looking toward wrapping up, it's the cream will rise to the crop. If you're good at your art, you don't need to politic your way to the top. You will get there because you're good at what you do. You're a good music producer, you're a good vocalist, you're a good writer. The example I think of when I talk about that is like Debi Makhsuspuri. He was writing songs for Shinda and Kuldeep Manik, and now he's known as one of the best, or if not one of the best Punjabi lyricists.
Agreed.
But that was that grind.
Yeah.
The cream rose to the crop. And it's difficult because now the market is so saturated, but in that way it's like find what fulfills you, right?
Yeah. And sort of to kind of start to wind down this episode, there's one last thing I want to say. The other problem with the Punjabi music industry is credit is not given happily. Yeah. Like, people don't want to give credit. They want the credit for themselves. And I think that sort of, personally, if I do something, I want my name on it, but I don't want that crazy spotlight, because that's just how I am, right? But if you've seen any of my songs, I'm in the videos for like maybe a scene or two, right? I'm not there for the whole video. And that's in Tare Naal, that's in the latest song that I released, so it's just how I like to be. Again, inspired by Jazzy B and Shinda. And Shinda used to pop into Jazzy B songs for like 2 seconds in the video. Right? Even in his latest Raf Supera song, he popped in for a scene. And I'm cool with that. But there's the song that I'm referring to of mine, the latest release was Baloria Kiyan. You guys can check that out. And again, in that one, I just pop in here and there. In Tare Naal, there was a casualty that occurred. You can watch the middle of the video.
Don't spoiler alert.
Watch it. Something happened.
But then again, there's our creativity as a young artist. We're like, oh, let's shoot our own music video. It's not the best music video, but like we're like, let's try this, and from that we learned.
I think at that time point, it was like, because videos were the thing, right? Like, you can't have a successful song without a video. So having the lack of budget that we had, literally that's what it was, is like, let's just do it ourselves. And but now with technology, even since then, that was 2015, right? So since then to now, the 6 years that have passed, the technology in devices like iPhone 12, for example, like there's artists shooting full music videos on their iPhones. Thanks to Unbox with Sings for the iPhone, by the way. But just, hey, you got to shout out when you can, right? But so the technology has changed, even in the recording process, the technologies have changed. But that's sort of some insight. It was a little bit all over the place because there's so much to say.
Yeah.
But I want to sort of, I want to continue this because I feel like I can say a lot of things that I've experienced.
Yeah, and I think like we talked a little bit about it, but I think we'll definitely have an episode on kind of the creative process, what our creative processes are.
Yeah.
What kind of gets us going, right? And it'll be cool to have Simran's perspective on that too, because not only as he's creative in many different ways and different avenues. So it'd be really cool to see what we can pick up from him, because I know my creative process is totally different than Simran's, than yours, and it'd be cool to talk about that too.
Yeah, I also have beats here produced by Kushwant Singh, called Watchwant Beats, the Watchwant album.
Beats. So
yeah.
Is that a good
with
one?
that, let's call this an episode. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, tell a friend. Pardesi Beats is back. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Pardesi_Beats. Listen to us on the go as well. We're on all major platforms for podcasts, so download, give us a 5-star rating, and I'm not even gonna talk about that, Pat. You can point all you want.
I'm actually sad, but I'm not sad. Euro Cup just happened. In our last episode with Amarjit Sohi, I was wearing my England jersey. I'm very, very hyped about the England team this year. But I'm an England fan as much as I'm an Italy fan. And so this year was so weird because both my favorite teams were facing off. I'll leave it at that. So I didn't wear the England jersey. I left the Italia one up, even my Habs jersey's off. And we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.